The Disenchantment of the World is a 1985 work of philosophical history by the French scholar Marcel Gauchet. Gauchet was born in Normandy in 1946. He began his academic career as a secondary school teacher before switching to higher education in the late 1960s. He wrote a thesis about Freud and Lacan and went on to produce several highly regarded books on political and philosophical themes, of which The Disenchantment of the World is the best known in the English-speaking world. In the interests of transparency, I should mention that I received a free copy of this book in exchange for an honest review. Its subtitle, A Political History of Religion, is slightly misleading because the discussion itself is so highly abstract. There are few references to specific historical events, much less to concrete political movements. It traces the history of religion since prehistoric times in an attempt to show how we in the West ended up in a post-religious society. It then explores the scope and limits of that society, given that, in the author's words, its generative principle is the progressive expression of the totality of possibilities latent within the schema of divine oneness. Gauchet thinks religion in its primordial guise, which still exists in places in the world today, produced a static society whose members were related ahistorically to an originary myth. Religion in its pure state, he says, is drawn into a temporal division that puts the present in a position of absolute dependence on the mythical past and guarantees the irrevocable allegiance of all human activities to their inaugural truth. There can be no questions about personal identity or destiny in such a society. Everything is related back to the core elements of customary permanence and sacral dependence. Historically speaking, the real kernel of religious attitudes and thought lies in accepting the external as the originating source and the unchangeable as law. There is a practical equality in this society. Everyone is equally conditioned by the founders, beings utterly unlike present-day ones, possessed of an intrinsic, unquestionable otherness. The primordial religion breaks down with the appearance of the political state, in a period roughly corresponding to what the German-Swiss thinker Karl Jaspers called the Axial Age. With the state's appearance, Gauchet says, the religious other actually returns to the human sphere. The past ceases to be an absolute other because the divine is partially instantiated in the present by priests and kings. The emphasis switches to the present, and paradoxically, humans become freer. The deity is now partly inside the world, and this is the beginning of the subject-object distinction. Meaning has ceased to be a given. Gauchet argues that Judaism and Christianity together led, by virtue of their internal logic, to the emergence of our current post-religious society. Judaism introduced a moral element to the world's sacral order, whereby it could be critiqued. Christianity introduced a scandalous inversion. Previously, the monarch had been the site of continuity between the divine and the human. But while the monarch of the world was at the top of the human pyramid, Jesus was at the bottom. This obviously provokes questions, and intentionally or not, makes Christianity a necessarily self-interrogative religion. And of course, the interrogation can't help but overspill its bounds. The Church virtually guaranteed that at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE by insisting on the intellectually shocking claim that Jesus was wholly God and wholly man. Henceforth, we have a dialectical type evolution which eventually issues in the Reformation, and shortly thereafter the post-religious society, which Gauchet thinks first appears in about 1700. This doesn't mean that the members of such a society become agnostic or atheist, far from it. We can imagine a society composed entirely of believers, Gauchet says, yet beyond the religious. What characterises the modern world is that we're henceforth confronted by autonomous domains developing according to their own necessities or dynamics. Gauchet retrospectively identifies three stages in the development of the post-religious society. Firstly, its birth in roughly 1700. Then in 1800, pure self-identity is dissolved, and we see the re-emergence of the other at the core of personal action. The subject was no longer in full possession of itself, with the ability to choose in full awareness, but was consciously dispossessed and determined by a part of itself it did not know. The third stage began in roughly 1900, when the unconscious replaced the conscious as the emblem of truth's relation to the self. But in fact, that may not be the end of the story. We are still scarcely in a position to know what the fully developed subject form would be like, Gauchet says. What we can clearly discern is that it would be far removed from the traditional idea of subjectivity and its prerequisites. Concepts for thinking about post-religious man do not yet exist. All of that might make the disenchantment of the world sound pessimistic. It isn't. History, from primordial religion onwards, has always been characterized by an other of some kind. To begin with, it lay in the mythical origin, then in the transcendent God. In the post-religious society, it's constituted by the future. A society no longer externally determined, Gauchet says, is a society which necessarily must turn completely towards the future. The future is the obligatory temporal orientation, legitimacy converted into time. This becomes a passionate defence of democracy, which Gauchet feels is the natural structural expression of the post-religious society. Such a society is infused with sacral values inherited ultimately from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Yet the future faces us down as something forever beyond our control. The secularization of history is completed as the future becomes unrepresentable, he says. The faceless and nameless future, unconstrained and unaffected by occult determinism, is the pure future. Questions of self-identity, meaning and destiny become unavoidable in this new world. In a concluding section called The Religious After Religion, Gauchet shows how we might still draw on the religion of our forebears for tentative answers to our most searching problems, from universalism, from art and beauty, from the mystery of subjectivity itself. Gauchet was briefly associated with anarchism in his youth. This book bears the hallmarks of that, although it couldn't possibly be categorized as an anarchist text. The author presents the state and bureaucracy, allies of humanity now no longer enemies, as partners in humankind's quest for progress into the unknown future. His genuinely positive outlook is robustly tempered by an awareness of the dangers and daunting responsibilities of freedom. He holds those two things together as well, if not better than any thinker I know. The last sentence in his book speaks of the daily throbbing pain that no sacral opiate can blot out, the merciless desire inherent in the very reality of being a subject. Gauchet deserves to be better known in the English-speaking world. Before that can happen, publishers need to bring the price of books like this one down considerably. The cost of academic books is a bit of a bugbear with me. For society to discuss and debate its options, thought-provoking scholarly texts need to be a little less eye-wateringly expensive, which of course may just be me.